Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Majani, once Shaykh Abdullah wants to salam as well.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk. And we have a very important discussion. Inshallah, we can already see the faces of the Shaykh here, Mufti Abdul Wahab, Imam Dawud, joining as the Executive Creative Director of Michigan. And Mufti Abdul Wahab will introduce him. Bismillah.
Yeah, first of all, Jazakallah khair, Imam, for joining us. As you probably all know, and we know for sure, that Imam has been extremely busy during the month of Ramadan, and with this post the month of Ramadan as well. Imam is the Executive Director of CARE Michigan. He has helped many of us personally and all the Muslims across the state, and he's serving right now not only the state of Michigan but the entire country as a voice of reason in these difficult times for us as believers and as Americans living in America. So we're extremely fortunate that Imam has joined us, given the fact that he has a lecture right before this and he has a lecture right after, and obviously Shaykh Abdullah being on, we're blessed with that as well. So Bajan, Shaykh Abdullah, Imam, if you can start with a few comments, and inshallah we'll jump right into the dialogue. Imam, is that okay with you?
Alhamdulillah, that's fine.
Bajan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think good. I just want to say, Imam, looking good. Inshallah, the kufi looking good, and all the books behind you looking great. Imam, you.
And I have a quarantine afro too, mashallah.
Quarantine afro? Yeah. That looks good. It's okay. Don't worry, I mean, you can have your wife or one of your kids YouTube how to cut hair, and they can cut your hair for you.
That's true. I'm going to be patient. In Allah mal sabirin. I'm going to wait for my barber and brother Arif in Dearborn. You check out the brothers in Dearborn. Brother Arif is a good barber in Dearborn. I'm going to wait for him to open back up, inshallah.
So my rule is I grow my hair every year and I cut it at Hajj or Umrah. And so I grow it, then that's it. Then this year it looks like Hajj has been suspended for foreigners at the moment, Yeah. So I'm going to be going to Hajj next year looking like Jesus.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Imam, so the mic's yours, inshallah. Please begin with your wisdom and your insights on these situations, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وأما بعد. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Miftaah Institute for this opportunity to speak about this very important issue, and may Allah bless you, Shaykhain, for the valuable khidmah that you're doing on behalf of the Ummah in disseminating sacred knowledge to the believing men and believing women, and also in a language and a format that's accessible and that people can understand. And I think that's very important. As our teacher, Ustad Sherman Abdul Hakim Jackson says, it's important to give context to the text. So thank you, and may Allah reward you and sustain you to help giving context to the text, meaning the Quran and the Sunnah. So I just want to give a few moments, and then we can have a discussion, inshallah, about what's going on right now in the top news story that swept across our nation and actually getting international attention regarding the street protests as it's related to the two most recent extrajudicial murders of Black folks in America, being Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky, and then George Floyd in Minneapolis, in which we know our Muslim brother Keith Ellison, who's the Attorney General, actually now has all four of those cops charged. But let me make some comments about this, and hopefully, very briefly, what role, at least we can just maybe prick the surface about why this is an important issue for us as Muslims, irrespective of our ethnic background or racial background. So in regards to these two killings, and there's been more that's going on, by the way. If you look at hashtag David McTee, you'll see that there's a guy who owned a restaurant in Louisville, Kentucky, who actually used to give free coffee, free food to cops, and he went out to protest the shooting of Miss Taylor, and he was shot and killed unarmed by Louisville police. And conveniently, the police officers had their body cameras cut off. So there's these killings have always take place. They take place almost every day in America. And the only thing that's been new in recent years is that we have these smartphones that have been capturing these beatings and these chokings and these shootings that have always gone on in American history since there's been organized.
More like these smartphones catching these dumb people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So this phenomenon isn't new. Basically now, people in the American public are just believing what we Black folks have been saying all along. We've been saying this all along. I've experienced these things my whole life. My father saw these things when he was a young man in the 60s, which would start the 1967 rebellion in the city of Detroit. My grandfather, who's 93 years old, may Allah bless him, he saw these things. So none of these things are new. The coverage is just new, right? And racism is as American as apple pie or cherry pie. As Imam Jamil Al-Amin famously said, may Allah free him from his unjust incarceration. He said that racism is as American as cherry pie because the land that we live on was established based upon the native people being ethnically cleansed from this land, and then African people being brought here as chattel, treated like cows and chickens, a significant percentage of them Muslim, stripped of their names, their language, and their culture, forced into Christianity, and then worked like animals, right? And then when enslaved people tried to leave and escape, then this is how we start to have organized law enforcement in America, because the officer comes from the overseer on the plantation. You see, overseer, officer, overseer, officer. The officers were the slave catchers that used to try to catch enslaved Africans rebelling and running away against the racist white Christian slave masters. Wow. Right? So from the very beginning of our country in the area of Reconstruction, law enforcement has been established to keep Black people and Native Americans in check, right? So we have to understand the historical, we can't understand where we're at and where we need to go if we don't understand the roots of like where we come from, right? So this is part of the asl of America. Now I say to American Muslims, where do we fit in this? I believe 100% what El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, rahmatullahi alayhi, said, Malcolm X, as well as what Imam Waheed Muhammad said, rahmatullahi alayhi, that really the only thing that can cure the American society in a holistic way from what troubles it in terms of this original sin of racism is Deen al-Islam. Deen al-Islam is the only thing that can save America. I'm totally, I'm like 100% sure of this, because passing laws and having court cases haven't solved the problem. If protesting and marching alone could solve the problem in laws and court cases, then Thurgood Marshall and Plessy versus the Board of Education, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Immigration Act of 1965, and Fair Housing Act, and affirmative action, and anti-lynching laws, in the court cases, that should have solved the problem. But here we are in 2020, and Black people still face the same amount of police brutality that we faced in 1970, 50 years later. In fact, mass incarceration of Black people is worse now in 2020 than it was in 1970, than it was when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was alive, right? So we can't legislate and adjudicate away the issue. In conclusion, America, you know, Bernie Sanders said we need a political revolution. I disagree with what Bernie Sanders said all along, though I voted for the burn in my own personal capacity.
You felt the burn.
I voted for the burn. I wasn't feeling the burn. May Allah spare us from the real burn in the akhirah.
I mean,
but America, the political revolution is not really what's going to solve America's issues. America needs a cultural revolution. In order to have a healthy cultural revolution, there has to be spiritual diagnosis and spiritual remedies or ilaj for the diseases of the heart that inform structural and systemic racism, right? Because we know that the father of racism is Iblis. Racism is satanic religion. We know Iblis said in the Quran, "Qala ana khayrun minhu, khalaqtani min nar wa khalaqtahu min tin." He said, "I am better than him because you made me a fire, but you made him of the dirt." Right. So this is the asl of racism, is in the takabbur that Iblis showed in disobeying Allah Azza wa Jal because he thought that he was better than Adam. Right. So we have so these spiritual diseases have to have remedies and deployed out into the culture. And once we have a cultural shift in America, then we will begin to see more fairness in jury pools, more fairness regarding how police communities to begin with, more fairness in judge decisions. And then we will have a real shift. But I'm in my 40s, and from talking to my elders, and my father and some of my elders, people like Imam Salim Khalid, people like Imam Zayd Shakar, people like Imam Siraj al-Hajj, may Allah preserve them all. That really nothing has fundamentally changed in America that much for the masses of Black people when it comes to this issue as when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968, or when Malcolm X was assassinated in the year 1964. Not really much fundamentally has changed in regards to policing of Black people in America. So I will stop with that, and then we can continue with the discussion.
I feel like, Imam, you hit it on the nail. I think that understanding the context, and contextualizing the situation. We as son of immigrants don't know that. Some of us don't appreciate what's happening out there. You will see a lot of Middle Eastern families and Desi families like, what is the right? What's the point of this right? And these same people are ready to protest for Palestine and for Kashmir, but they don't see they don't legitimize what is happening now. So I think it's a lot of it's that we haven't read into it deeply. We haven't kept. Black people are not going around telling people, "Hey, man, my father." You're telling me now your dad was part of the protests in the 60s, right? You're telling me now your grandfather was part of this civil rights movement. But Black people are not going around, people of color are not going around telling people, hey, my parents did this, my parents did this. They don't have flags and banners on the highways. We gave our lives for sacrifice. They're not going around doing this press or conferences about their sacrifices. So it's our responsibility, people of immigrant families. My parents are from Pakistan, and people who are from Middle East and other parts of the world who came to this country, whose parents came to this country, to have a dialogue with people like you. And so I feel like if you could tell us right now, as you're seeing these protests that are happening, what is the Muslims community's responsibility in this venture? I know if I start a few things that you said, I have so much to talk about also, but I want you to say everything because I really don't know. I'm honestly saying this. I cannot speak on behalf of the Black community. I can only speak about on behalf of the Muslim community and also a small demographics of the Muslim community, which are the Indian Pakistani community, and the Arabs got to speak for themselves. Everyone has to check their own closet. So, Imam, what is happening in these protests? What are the favorable results that we've seen from a legal perspective and also from a spiritual perspective, and how this is energizing a young generation that we've never seen before? Maybe you've seen it before. I haven't seen such high level of solidarity and unity in the community. So can you go ahead and give us some background on that?
Yeah, sure. And I will focus on this and then make another point that's related, which I actually think takes more importance, because I believe that the reality is that this enthusiasm is going to eventually die down. And I think the more important question is, where do we go next as Muslims? But right now, there was a visceral reaction where people went out into the streets and started to protest and there were some grassroots organizers in certain cities, Minneapolis being one of them, and it went to other cities where people began to organize protests. And people came out into the streets. And what's very interesting about these protests that I think are different than, and I said much hasn't changed since the 60s and 70s. Well, in these particular protests, there's one thing that has changed, and that white Americans have been the majority of people out in the streets protesting.
Okay.
And this is something that's kind of like unprecedented. I've never seen this in my 40 some years of living. And
Wow.
my father's generation, they never saw this. I was speaking recently to Imam Jawhari and Imam Nadim Ali down in Atlanta, and also Dr. Issam Bagbi. And they were like, back in the day in the 60s and 70s, like you never saw this many white folks who were out protesting in actual cities on behalf of Black life and against police brutality. So this is something that is different, and I think that there is something to be said about this that is noteworthy. Now, what I would also say in regards to these protests, and I think this is where we have to caution our community, and there's history that needs to be understood regarding this, is that there's no doubt that there are outside forces that have come into these protests to try to derail the protests.
Delegitimize them.
To delegitimize, and even people who don't even really care about Black people will want to hijack the protests and try to use it for their anarchist agenda or their white supremacist agenda to try to start a race war in America.
You're a care executive director, and when these branded Muslims, extremists who try to hijack our Islam. We know how insulting that is. Like someone does a shooting at a club in Orlando or San Bernardino or some airport. Someone does, like, we're looking at ourselves in their faces like, what? This has nothing to do with Islam.
Yes.
Right. And the Islamophobes are looking on the far right, and they're like, this is what Islam must look like. But we know deep down this is not what our religion teaches. So I can see the frustration and the people and the color community and the people of the African American can see. I want you to talk about that too as you go through.
Yeah. So there has been some looting that has taken place, but I'd like to make a clear distinction between those people who've been involved in what the term is looting. And I'm really trying to struggle for a different word because I don't like that term looter. But there are people who are looting in the African American community out of frustration, and of course there are some opportunists. I mean, I don't see a reason why people have to go and loot a Louis Vuitton store for purses or Rolex watches, right? But people are going to loot, and they're out of frustration of the system. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said this, that the riot is the voice of the unheard, right? A riot is the voice of the unheard. And people have been talking about this over and over for decades and decades. And then sometimes there's the incident that proverbially breaks the straw that breaks the camel's back. Then you have people.
I read what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had tweeted a while back, is this is a nation that's been pushed to the edge.
Yeah.
No, I'm not justifying it, but a nation that's pushed to the edge.
Then you have other groups of people who come not only outside of the cities, even come from other states to come and protest, but not just protest, to actually actively be involved in property damage and destruction for their own goals. So I always give you a couple of examples that I know from eyewitnesses, right? And I've heard numbers of stories about this from people I know. So I'm not just going off of some wild conspiracy theories. Like if we're going by the language of ulum al-hadith, to me this is tawatur. Okay, this is tawatur. So sister who told me, Nigerian sister in Chicagoland told me, along with her and her brother is a witness to this as well, of the opening protests. White people with out-of-state plates, couple of trucks driving up in Chicago, dropping off pallets of bricks, trying to get people to take bricks, to throw bricks in the windows and throw bricks at police. People found these pallets of bricks in Dallas area. People found similar pallets of bricks in Atlanta, Georgia. I was talking to Imam Suleiman Hamid about this a couple of days ago, who's the resident scholar at the Atlanta Masjid of Al-Islam, the largest masjid in the city of Atlanta proper. We talked about these issues. So people have seen this of outside people coming up trying to stoke something. People who don't live in the community. It's like people who don't live in the community coming, white people being caught on camera spray painting BLM for Black Lives Matter on Starbucks or on the cathedral in Washington D.C. Outside agitators who have their own anarchist agenda. Another thing is Ustad Mahmoud Ahmed. He's a chaplain, Hafidhullah. He's Somali brother. He's a chaplain at the University of Minnesota. We had a talk the other day. He said flat out that in one particular street that there have been for a while outside people trying to buy properties there because they're trying to gentrify a particular street in a particular area. And people didn't sell their properties. It's a small business district. Now, white people have been seen throwing Molotov cocktails and have burned down a number of small businesses, including Muslim-owned, Somali-owned businesses, burned down those same businesses areas where people were trying to buy them out and get them out of the neighborhood. So I can't help but think that maybe some land barons or some people who have corporate interests that want to develop that area paid people to commit arson attacks to take advantage of people protesting in the streets under the cover of the protest to cause property damage. But one thing is for sure, there are Black people who are looting, but most of these arson attacks that have taken place, at least in Minneapolis, that we have witnesses for this issue in particular, people who are dropping off bricks to throw bricks at and Molotov cocktails and things like this at police and businesses, these aren't African-American people. These aren't Black people. But then the unfortunate issue is cities that are overly policed to begin with because of Black and brown people living there, particularly Black people, overly policed. It gives the police an excuse to use military type tactics in overly policed communities to begin with, and in Minneapolis to call in the National Guard, which places Black bodies or Black people at more risk of danger, right? So if you're going to go out to a protest, keep your eyes open. If you see some people that are trying to stir you up to do some sort of violence, that might be a sincere person, but it could be an agent provocateur. Just as when Dr. King marched in Memphis in 1968, it's been declassified why he went back to Memphis, Tennessee during J. Edgar Hoover's counterintelligence program. The federal government paid people to start a riot. They paid people to bust out windows. They paid people to start provocation against the police to try to delegitimize the actual protesters, to derail the movement, and to allow the police an excuse to come and further beat up and kill Black people. So there's more ways in supporting just protesting. But if you're going to go to the protest, use your proper PPE. Try to keep distance as much as you can, though it's almost impossible to keep 6 feet distance at a protest. Keep on your mask, but keep your eyes open that the enemy has infiltrated these protests. And I say that with 100% confidence. And we have to keep our eyes open.
Wow.
So, Bajan, like, you know, what you originally asked Imam, Jazakallah khair, Imam, for the insight.
Yeah.
But like, you know, the only thing that can undo any form of arrogance through racism, because Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, he mentions that there are many external manifestations of arrogance and kibr, and he says one of the most vile and poisonous of those manifestations is the idea of takabbur over other people. Right?
Yes.
Because my race, my tribe, tribalism or racism. He actually uses the word tribalism rather than racism. Yeah. And you say the only way that this can be undone is through Islam. And a lot of our people sometimes forget that the society which was the most racist throughout the history was perhaps not the society that we're living in right now, but the society of the Arabs before the coming of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because in that society, it was, you couldn't even stand in the same row as these people. And why did Abu Lahab not become Muslim? Why did he not become Muslim? He came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said that, "Oh Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what would we get if we become Muslim? Like what's there that's special for us?" قال الذين استكبروا للذين استضعفوا. Like this has been a common theme in the Quran, that the ones that were better said to those that are lower, لو كان خيرا ما سبقونا إليه. If there was good in it, you would never have gotten it before us. Right? This has been there before the coming of our Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet said that, hey man, there's nothing special for you. Everyone is the same. And that's what made him say that statement of tabban li hada ad-din. May there be destruction for such a way of life. And Allah responded to that by saying, tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab. Right? There wasn't a society that was more racist than the society of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But he changed it, as you said, Imam Dawud, by changing the culture. And I said this before as well, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not just come down to teach us how to pray salat, give zakat, and fast, but rather the first thing he did for the first 10 years of Mecca, where there was no salat, there was no zakat, there was no siyam, there was nothing. He taught a framework of mind. He taught a frame of mind. He changed their mindset. He taught them that it's not about you, it's about us. All of those hadith that refer to al-mu'minu kal-jasad al-wahid, all of those hadith, if you look back in history, in the time they were mentioned, was in Mecca in those first few years. Well, the Prophet was creating the idea of a community where he sees Bilal being tortured. He doesn't know who he is, Imam, right, Bajan? He doesn't know who that man is. He just sees a person being tortured. He's not his friend, not his cousin. He's not a person that he's had dinner with before. Sometimes I don't know who that person is, right? He doesn't know who he is. All he sees is a person. He doesn't know anything about him. He's being tortured. He says to his Sahabas that man yashtari hadha al-ghulam. Who's going to buy this person out? Someone amongst us has to do it. And Abu Bakr said, I'll do it. I'll take care of it. And Bajan, please finish the story about what happened, because I think that how Abu Bakr bought him and purchased him was a very heavy discussion that he had with Umayyah ibn Khalf. Can you finish it off if you don't mind?
Mufti Sahib, it's going to be a very long discussion. I think
just that part where he said that if I knew, like, the point that he said that if you bargain with me, I would have sold him to you for $1. And Abu Bakr said that
you put a high price on him, and he kind of judged it on his race. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq saw something else. He saw beyond that. He saw his faith. He saw his character. And he said, if you haggled with me for 100 dinar or awqiyah, a waqin, I would do more than that. So and I think what was important, because in that discussion is Bilal's ex-master he's humiliating him in front of his face. And that's the worst thing, when you're insulting someone and no one backs you up. When this injustice, like this type of language being used, and there's no one. Abu Bakr had to speak out. He's like, hey, this is not acceptable. This is the honor I have. And right away, Bilal felt more confidence and
support. I felt support.
I mean, it happens in our community a lot of times. A lot of people of color, they're hesitant to do so many things because they're afraid of the criticism they might get. So I want to go ahead, Imam Dawud, as a personal Muslim African American, who has an Islamic background, educational background, also as an attorney, and you're well, mashallah, qualified, and people are finally realizing your resources that you can provide, and people have been benefiting from you from a long time. But Imam, can you tell me some of your own personal challenges as sometimes people are racist to people who might not have the best education, right? But no, this racism is all across the spectrum. People are racist with people. People don't see that. So I want you to tell me that how you've also experienced racism in this country from the Muslim community. That I know it's harsh to say this, but can you? You don't have to say any cities, no names. Please don't say Flint, because Flint loves you. You know that, right? But just how you've also felt this as a community member.
Well, I faced it in different ways. I'll tell you this, that I grew up in Chesterfield, Virginia, which is a suburb of Richmond. and I grew up around a lot of people who were rednecks and racists, and I was called. I've been called the N-word before, by white people in the South, going back in the late '80s, early '90s when I was down there. But I never got called a slave until I was in El Madinatul Munawwara.
Wow.
At Khaliji, that I was at the elevator, and I forgot something in my room, so I went back. It's like around 2004, and I went back to my room, and I did the card to open the door, and the elevator opened, and then I heard the Khaliji guy said, "Ya Abdi, ta'al Abdi, yalla Abdi." Right then, later on, I was with a group, and we were going to Ta'if. Myself and another brother, he's a student of knowledge, who graduated from Jamia Abi Noor, Imam Tariq Najiullah. May Allah preserve him. He's a chaplain now at Johns Hopkins University, where he was in Sham. So we were together, and the cab driver was trying to overcharge us. And then we were like we know that you're trying to charge us way too much, right? So we were like debating with him, and then as we were giving him the money, then he looked over at me and he said, "Ruh Shaitan Aswad." Like, he didn't even just call me a devil.
Oh my God.
He called me a black devil, like Aswad's Tawqeed, right? Like I just can't be a devil. I have to be a black devil, right? So like, unfortunately, and I've seen, and also in the Emirat, I've in my adult life, I've probably been called more racist things in my face by Arab than I have by rednecks and Islamophobes.
Wow.
I gotta keep it real with you.
Wow.
And this is no disrespect. I'm not lumping all Arab in one box. And even I know that even Arabs are culturally different from maybe it's the Arab of the Maghreb and Morocco are culturally different from the ones in Saudi and Emirat. Like, I know all of that, right? I'm not saying, I'm not, please don't take this as, I love all of my Muslim brothers and sisters, right? But these are things that I've experienced. Now I'll tell you something that's a little more subtle. I'm not going to mention the masjid, but I came to give a khutbah for the first time at a masjid in a suburban area. I'm not going to mention what city. So,
I'm very good at guessing. I'm very good at guessing, Imam Dawud.
So I walked in to the area to go make wudu. So this uncle.
You're the khatib. You're the khatib.
I'm the khatib. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know I'm the khatib. So it's this Desi uncle. He wants to. I walk in, so he wants to teach me how to make wudu. Like, he doesn't give me salam or anything. Then I walk in to the musalla afterwards, after he, I guess, inspects my wudu, and he tells me to make rakatain. Because you do tahiyatul masjid. He didn't use that word in Arabic. He may not even know that language, that word. But he said, "Oh, you have to make 2 rakats before you sit down." So I'm just like,
doing the accent.
So
I'm
listening to him. So I make my 2 rakats. He gives me salam, and then he said to me, "What's your name?" I said, "My name is Dawood." He said, "Oh, mashallah, do you know what your name means?"
Wow.
So I just sit there and listen to him talk. I'm just sitting there, just listening to him talk. I'm like, man, like miskeen, like this poor guy. Like, he's embarrassing himself. So afterwards, it's time. It's like the alarm goes off. It's like 1:30. I go walk up to the minbar to give the khutbah. I stand up, in alhamdulillahi nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu, etc. And I start talking, and the guy puts his head down in shame afterwards. So after the salah, he comes up to me, and I was like, "Uncle, don't say anything. I pardoned you while you were saying that to me." Wow. But my point is, if I were, I could have been Desi and been a Hindu convert. But he wouldn't know. If he would have seen me and I was Desi, he wouldn't have thought that he had to take it upon himself to teach me wudu or teach me what my name is. Or talk. He has such a condescending tone, right? Because I'm black, right? But had I been I could have been a Hindu convert to Islam that walked off the street, and I wouldn't have been asked those questions. And I know it, right? So, but we as Allah Azza wa Jal tells us, we have to be generous in pardoning our people. And I didn't take it personal, but that's just like one example of like what I've experienced over the years since I was a youth. I mean, I could tell you more things going back to the 90s, right? But I'm just saying this like as a group, as an adult. I'm just telling you, right? Like it's crazy.
Imam, I'm sorry to try to cut you off, but that subtle racism is what really irritates me. Like and so we could go back to this in a moment. But Imam, we talked about, you said something, and I know we could be here all day talking about this, and we want to hear you, but I wanted to ask you from the spiritual Islamic aspect, and if I say something, you're my lawyer now, so you got to back me up, So if Pamela Galler and these fools come after me, you got to speak to my Imam Dawud. But
they're watching you. They're watching you. You're going to be on memory. They're gonna clip you up.
My message to them is "Qulu la ilaha illallah tuflihu." You'll be happy, and you'll be successful, and you'll be rich. Aslim taslam, like the Prophet ﷺ said to Abu Sufyan.
Yes.
I consider him like the Frank Gaffney of the society. I'll say Aslim taslam. I'm telling you guys, just if you're watching me, this is the message, and it's peaceful, and you will live in peace. Nevertheless, the aspect of this spiritual remedy to racism, since it's so out there and it's prevalent, so prevalent, like you said, you felt it in Medina. The Prophet that eradicated this prejudice ideology, you're feeling uncomfortable in a city. I mean, it's so sad, it should be welcoming even more, astaghfirullah. And I live with a lot of, Middle Eastern, Pakistani, Indian people, great people, great Muslims. And sometimes they don't even know they're being racist. And I don't think the negligence is an excuse to be racist. Don't get me wrong. If you don't know the speed limit, you're going to get pulled over either way. It's a crime. Negligence is an excuse for a fault. That's my rule. Maybe I won't give you the same punishment, but you are still accountable. But in our society, Imam, is that Islam is supposed to be the solution. And then when we go to Muslim countries, I find more racism prevalent in those countries. So people get so confused as a Desi when I go to the Khaliji countries, right? Or as an African American when we go to these countries. And then the sad part is, what really bothers me is I felt racism, and it's nothing compared to African American. People say nasty things to me all the time, But everyone has a different type of skin. I got a little thick skin, I might do the J.R. Smith stuff to them, take them for a whooping. But the reality, is, Imam Dawud, is that what bothers me is how blacks are racist and prejudiced to blacks, where Muslims are prejudiced and racist to Muslims. How it's so painful when a Muslim discriminates against a Muslim. For example, you have a beard. You have a beard. Why do you have why are you discriminating against my beard? Why are people from are parts of Africa discriminating against people who are darker from Africa? Why are people from Pakistan who are victim to racial prejudice language racist to other black people? So I understand Arabs are white, even in their form, they categorize as white. We brown people, Desis, they feel the prejudice pressure that comes against them, and then they vent it to other people of darker skin. And I said, how can you, what mouth do you speak out of? So that's my first discussion. How are we going to counter peacefully a racial society within the Muslim community? And that's what I want to talk about. And I'm going to talk about this later on for the week, because Islam is a solution. Islam, without a doubt. When I'm looking at all these protests and reading all these articles, and all these feeds, I'm looking at man, how would Islam counter this? And because, I don't want to sound like Islam is a solution. We're trying to pass Sharia law, that whole Sharia law argument. No, it's not Sharia law. There's so many things that American law has that's Islamic. It's so many things. The European, can you share some of that with us? If you can just remind us how how the European courts and the West has benefited from Islamic concept. Can you share some of those with us? Because you're a lawyer.
Well, let me say this, that the founding of our country and the legal system of our country, and actually this would be a good exercise to go if you're able to go Washington, D.C. once the sheltering in place lifts. But if you go into the main chamber of where the U.S. Supreme Court, they have different images that they've depicted of the lawgivers that have influenced the American jurisprudence system. And in the main court, and I mean, as CARE back in the 90s, we actually protested this because we don't like to see images of any of the prophets of Allah, but they actually have a depiction of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the main chamber of the Supreme Court. If you go to the Library of Congress and you go up into the middle area, and there's like a rotunda area, but in the middle, they have different civilizations that help form and frame the legal system of the United States of America and how we operate as a civilization. So they have Rome and they have Greece, they have some different civilizations, but the only religion that is up there is Islam. You don't even have Christianity up there, right? The basic Bill of Rights that we have in America, and we know that Thomas Jefferson, some of the founding fathers actually studied and looked into Islam.
Yeah, Quran translation.
But we can see a direct correlation of this philosophy of the initial Bill of Rights. We can see it being inspired and taken from Ash-Shatibi's writings, rahimahullah ta'ala, from the Maqasid al-Sharia, of the basic maqasid of the preservation of life, the preservation of religion, the preservation of intellect, the preservation of one's lineage, and the preservation of one's property. You basically see this, though it's not referencing the Quran and Sunnah as far as the actual how it plays itself out, but the objectives, right? We can look at the objectives of the Islamic law, and in a very broad, obtuse sense, you can see this in how the founding fathers. Now, of course, the founding fathers were very problematic because they also wrote, Thomas Jefferson wrote that Black people constituted 3/5 of a human. And that was for electoral votes and population count. So we were considered and written to be 3/5 of a human being. And of course, that guy, he owned slaves and had children by a slave woman named Sally Hemings. Then he didn't even free his own children. And that's another bad thing, is that these slave masters, they would keep their own children as slaves. Some don't even sell off their own children, right? Like, who does that? Like, you have children by the, like, we have Ummahatul Awlad, like, in Islamic history, right? But the woman is not kept a slave, and the child is born to free and to enjoy all of the social status of the lineage and also inheritance rights. But Thomas Jefferson kept his own children as slaves. So America is established, if I use the language of hadith, sharr an-nas dhul wajhain, right? The worst of people have two faces. So America has two faces. All this stuff about liberty and justice for all, and we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and all of these things. And then we have, on the other hand, Black people are like 3/5 of a human being, and all of these sorts of things. So that goes back to the initial problem that we have to deal with in America, because America has a real deep-seated problem for centuries.
Bijan, if I may ask, Imam, like, I think he has to leave in about 13 minutes.
Yeah.
We perhaps cannot fix the problem with all Americans, but I think it's due right upon us to fix the problems with Muslims, right? That's our haqq, that's our right.
Minimum.
And one of the three commandments are found most in the Quran. One is taqwa, the second is ihsan, and the third is adl. Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan. Like, that's something that we read every single Jum'ah. It's something it's very prevalent within our community. Imam, if you can just give a few tips, and then maybe Shaykh Abdullah and myself can also say a few things that our parents did with us that helped us open up with different communities, different diverse environments.
Imam Dawud ended with that discussion. Like
because he has to leave in 13. But you want to start it with, Mufti Rahman was mentioning this the other day too, like some of the things that our father did with us that helped us. You want to start, because I think people need to know that there are ways of doing it, right?
It's funny how even in like a suburban, like even people in Flint, they don't feel comfortable going to the Flint Mall because of black people there. But the Muslims, like, I don't want to go there. I'm going to go all the way to Somerset. Calm down. But I
didn't know that. You told me something new.
Yeah, not Flint. The Muslims everywhere. Even if they didn't live by this mall, but they would go to a preferred mall because probably the items are better. But they're just, people don't admit it, but their language just doesn't add up. Their body language. And it's not about calling anyone out. I'm going to call
or like how you go by a global moon sighting, but when Kenya and Somalia says they sight the moon, you don't go by it. But when the Saudis and Emiratis said that they sight the moon,
we're on your side, man.
According to astronomy. But mashallah, you have to go by what the Saudi says, but you can't go by what the Somalia.
Everyone's okay with Saudi until Saudi starts to bomb Syria and Yemen, and they were not okay with Saudi. It's nothing makes sense.
Like Mufti Rahman, Abdullah were one of the only two scholars that were in the group.
I'm not going to get into this, and for 30 years I followed Saudi, and all of a sudden, where's Saudi now? They're not supporting your country. We don't like them anymore, But it's all emotional, nothing factual, and I think the imams haven't done justice to it either. Straightforward, the imams, the academic circles haven't found a solution. I don't think there's ever going to be a solution, honestly. I'm not hopeless, but there's so much on this discussion. Anyways, I want to say this, Imam, that as a young man living in a very vibrant Muslim community, I love Flint, and Mufti Abdul Wahab lives in Warren, And Flint, if you know the demographics of Flint, there's extreme disparity within the Muslim community, just like across America. You go to the Bay Area, then you have Oakland right across the bridge. You go to St. Louis, you have a community full of physicians right across the river, right across the road. You have the whole, what's happening in this inner city. This is all across. This is the tale of all the cities. But my question is, my dad, parents have this responsibility to make their children comfortable with other people.
Yes.
It's parents' responsibility. And what I was saying to people, I was saying to my students, I was like, how is it that you've gone to school with people of color? You have maybe a few classmates who are Sudanese or Somalian or African American, right? Or African, just an African, background, or Central America, and you've never invited them over for dinner. Imam, I don't even want to go into how people speak about, I can say this, you can't say this, right? There's certain things you can't say. But there's a prejudice to even colored imams. There's a bias to African imams. There's a bias to Sudanese imams. The whole argument of honorarium, for example. Mufti Abdul Rahman doesn't like this discussion, like how men and women should get paid equal. But then imams should also get paid equal if you're white or you're Arab or black. If the qualifications are equal, then everyone should be treated equally. Right? We're all created equal. Isn't that the same argument? And I say there's an extreme bias there where Imam can be from Ghana or from Somalia, and he has a great voice. He's the greatest singer, artist, Quran, but there's a bias. Like, he reads better than your Pakistani Shaykh or your Syrian or Palestinian Shaykh. I know there's this national attraction to the person from the same culture. Like, I understand. An Egyptian like to hear an Egyptian, but there can't be that. There can't be an extreme disparity like that. So I'm not saying it's prominent in all the communities, but I feel like we have to tackle that also. There has to be a fair discussion on that. And I think it starts, if the Muslim community is not able to be honest to themselves, we're not solving any problem here. And from my experiences as growing up, I wasn't raised in inner city. I was raised in an Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti area for my whole life. But I really give credit to the work of Da'wah Tabligh. What happens with that work is that they do not look at the masjid, right? When they go for khuruj, they go to every mosque, every single mosque. They go to inner city, they go to the big mosque. Most of the big mosques lock the doors. They said, you can't come there anyways. You guys have a kitchen, complications, board complications. But but the reality is that when you have these people, when we used to go to Hallam Park, for example, all the time,
Yeah.
and we used to see our community.
Back when Maulana Zubair used to be there.
Oh man, Sheikh Zubair, legend. May Allah preserve his life.
I mean,
one of the first African American scholars who literally went on a ship overseas to become a scholar in India.
Yep.
And in the 60s, and the 70s, and the 80s, and went on a ship all the way to India to become an alim. Came back to serve Detroit. Now is in Arizona. My dad's culture has been this. I'm telling you the truth, Imam. I don't know if you know this. My dad never did Eid with the family. Never. My dad only did Eid in the inner city. And
he would drive 45 minutes an hour.
45 minutes an hour, and then he would shop before that, do all the gift shopping. And this is also when I want you to know that, Imam, we never spent time with our dad because 10 years of the month we were at a boarding school, right? And the 1 year of the one month that we would have in Ramadan, we would be leading Taraweeh prayer somewhere else. So we had we could count the days that we had with our father. And Eid was a day, but my dad never spent Eid with us. He would always go to the inner city and give gifts to the Hallam Park Mosque. And I'm sure they're viewing this, and their testimony to this. And it was the most joyful moment of the year to spend the 2 Eids with his brothers from the inner city. And he would take us with him. We would be selfish, like, oh, we have relatives and friends coming, we want to stay home, because we were kids. And that taught us a lesson. That taught us to be part of the joy of the community that's our community. Imam, one of the coolest things that one of our elders said, that, and Malcolm X says this, he said, the growth of Islam is on the backs of Black people, in this country, and Malcolm X has the same whole discussion on this. And I feel like we ignore that to a very extreme element, just the way we treat our masjids from the inner city, just the way we treat their imams. Forget other people, the people who are Muslims, who are African American, how they're treated, we haven't given them full attention. So I'm victim to this myself. I feel guilty, and I think this whole awareness has also waken me up to higher awareness. I don't consider myself to be a racist. I would never, I would be honest on that. But I would admit that I haven't done enough for our brothers and sisters. There's so much more. I saw my dad do it. He did it relentlessly, all the time. And I'm telling you right now, if my dad called one brother or member from the inner city of Detroit, they would line up in front of his house. They loved him so much. It bothers me how Muslims would just stand up for the propaganda of Black Lives Matter now. All of a sudden, all these Muslims are like, yeah, we're activists, we want to make the change. But when's the last time you supported them? What's the last thing you've done for them? And I think you should ask yourself. I'm not saying you shouldn't go out and stand in solidarity with the people, but honestly, we have parents who are racist. Our parents are racist. You have their children. I think you should grab the same banner that you took to the streets to hand it to your parents. Help them, make them draw it with you. And they should be addressed. And this argument that, one of our arguments, Imam Dawud, is zakah. Our zakah of, I feel like our zakah, if that zakat is disposed correctly to our inner city, we will solve the problem. And this whole argument, I'm going to say this very clearly, and I hate to say this, but people are we don't trust the inner city people. We've given them money in the past. We've seen misuse of money. I'm going to be flat on blunt. When's the last time you've seen a transparency of a mega mosque in Michigan? And now some local masjid in inner city hasn't used the money they wanted to do for the wudu area, or their HVAC, or their roof was leaking, and you've been giving them money off. What do you give them? $500? $1,000? $10,000? But we're talking about mega mosque. When's the last time we've seen transparency? I'm not saying anyone is stealing. This is not what I'm saying. Imam, that what I'm saying, no one's stealing. Right? If my wife works and I'm using her money, I'm not stealing her. I'm probably misusing her money. I'm buying something that I shouldn't be buying. Right? Some people misuse the finances of the world. So what I want to say is we become so critical with the Black community, my community. I'm talking about myself, right? Oh, we've helped them in the past. We've seen no change. Well, let's put the money. Let's say like it is. I mean, masjids all across America have a very shallow transparency account, right? But when it comes to inner city or mosques of the people of color, all of a sudden we're lawyers and auditors and IRS and we're auditing everything they're doing and every second, every penny. I mean, really, give me a break. you know. And honestly, like I feel like there's just so much hype to the propaganda that I'm going to stand with the Black Lives movement or Black Lives and this police brutality. I'm going to stand against it. But like we haven't stood up for ourselves, for our own community inside.
Yeah. Hey, Shaykh, I have another program in 2 minutes.
Okay, you can finish it off for us.
Sorry, but I am more than willing to come back to have another conversation at some point, and also for us to really talk about some of the spiritual remedies of al-Unsuriya or al-Asabiyya, as Imam Ghazali and many others use that word that came from the prophetic hadith. I'm willing to come back for us to have a discussion and some practical ways in which we can deal with this issue inside of our community, because I believe we can't really fix outside without working on inside, and perhaps working on the inside more. It's kind of like you want to give someone some water to drink that's thirsty, and you pour some clean water into a glass that's filthy, right? And that's kind of like how I think we try to address things. We want to go outside and give people water, but we're not giving them the water with a clean glass, right? So that's just my take, but I have to get going. Please.
Thank you for joining us.
We'll have you again. May Allah preserve you. May Allah bless you.
Ameen.
Prayers.
Ameen. Ameen.
We'll see you again soon.
Inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
Sam Bajan.
Yes, sir.
I think we should end it.